And Metropolitan Police firearms officer Martin Blake has pleaded not guilty to the murder of Chris Kaba, who died from a single gunshot wound during a Met operation in Streatham, South London, in September 2022.
Blake had his anonymity lifted by Judge Mark Lucraft after media organisations challenged the order. He's been granted bail pending a trial set for October. Well, joining us now to discuss this is former Metropolitan Police Detective Peter Bleksley. When I read this news, my heart sank. I thought, that poor man, does he not have a right to not, have some degree of anonymity so he can be tried fairly? And why media organisations are clamouring to stick the knife in this before any verdict is drawn, I don't know. Surely a lot of firearms officers are going to be absolutely outraged by this decision.
Let me just mention the fact that I was a former firearms officer as well as being a detective. So I've had that gun oil under my fingernails, and every firearms officer knows that if you pull the trigger, you are going to be subject to the most intense scrutiny imaginable. And we accept that. That's part and parcel of the job. What has happened here is, I believe quite rightly, the judge has named the officer.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Now, I can hear police officers throwing things at their televisions or shouting at me as I speak, because there has already been huge outrage on social media from police officers, and the Metropolitan Police Federation have released a statement today when they've said they were shocked. Well, hang on, we've known this naming was coming up for weeks, so I don't quite know how they could be shocked, and they're saddened and they're generally outraged by it all. It would have been a, quite frankly, ludicrous precedent to set to allow this officer to stand trial anonymously. It would have been a dangerous precedent to set. Open justice is crucial. It has to be seen to be done.
Should he be standing trial for murder?
Yeah, look,
that's a completely different question.
The issue is this, Peter. The issue is this, if I may. It's this. Look, what I think is this guy should not be in court. He should not be charged with murder. He may or may not have made a wrong decision in the split second, but that is what firearm police officers should be protected from. They've got to make a decision in the split second. It won't always be right, and to charge that guy with murder is utterly wrong and ludicrous in terms of encouraging other officers to become firearms officers. We know hundreds have quit because specifically of this. But once he does get into court, I totally agree with you, he has to be named. The justice process has to be transparent. So my point is, he just should not be in that court. He should not be charged with murder.
Well, I'm old enough to remember cases from many years ago and more recent cases. Dougie Lovelock stood trial for the shooting of Cherry Gross. He was acquitted. Officers stood trial for shooting Stephen Waldorf in Earl's Court back in the 80s. They were acquitted. And more recently, Tony Long was charged with the murder of Earl Rodney, because Tony Long shot him dead. And Tony Long was acquitted. We shall have to wait and see what happens at this trial. The evidence has been gathered and will be presented by the Independent Office of Police Conduct, who are staffed with some wonderful hindsight engineers who are able to take months and years to decide over something that a firearms officer has had to decide in a split second. So in that regard, I do see where you're coming from. You know, they are hindsight engineers who can pore over it for months.
Yeah. And if, look, a police investigation, yes, you have, of course, obviously. And I suppose some of those police investigations could reveal that somebody was a bit trigger happy, and maybe they then do deserve to go into court. But I think that the instances of that would be extremely few and far between. I believe firearms officers are very responsible. Now and again, in that split second, they're going to make the wrong decision, and they need to be protected in that situation.
Well, we don't know whether the decision made by this officer is correct or not. A criminal trial at the Old Bailey will decide upon that. I am going to trust the process, trust the judicial process, trust the jury, and hope that whatever is the correct verdict, that is the verdict that is delivered.
Now, we've been talking a lot about Theresa May today because she's going to be stepping down as an MP. And of course, as Home Secretary for a very long time, she had a lot of run-ins with the police. What is your verdict on how well she did that job? And did she leave the police force in a better or worse position?
I need to go and get my blood pressure monitor because Theresa May is guaranteed to make it rise like no other politician before or afterwards. Quite frankly, the catastrophic state of British policing that it's in at the moment is essentially her fault, both as Home Secretary and Prime Minister.
Tell us why.
She dismantled policing as we used to know it. Her and her sidekick, Sir Tom Windsor, were determined to undermine everything that was good about British policing. And I'm not only just talking about pay and conditions and pensions and all of that, which they largely oversaw the butchering of, but the numbers of police officers, the huge reduction in numbers of police officers was foisted upon them by her slashing and burning police budgets. So they simply couldn't afford to pay officers.
Did she not also scrap stop and search before having to bring it back?
And the trail of teenage blood that is shed in our cities from London to Bristol to many other places actually flows to her front doorstep.
So you'd agree with me, she is our worst ever Prime Minister?
Indeed.
Well done, Peter.
Strong words, Peter Bleksley.
Thank you very
Never
much.
want to milk
Glad we
his
asked you
words.
that.
Thank you, Peter.
Thanks, Peter.